Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina. I am the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up in TechSoup New Zealand. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar Volunteer Recruitment and Retention Using a CRM, which will be presented by Philip Manzano from Keela. We'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any questions during the session, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel, and Phil will answer them at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you have any technical issues, please also type it into the questions box and I'll be able to help you out through there. Please note that if you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience possible today. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you all within 2 business days after the webinar ends, along with the slides. That's all from me for now. I'll pass it over to Phil to get things started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tina. Well, good morning, everybody. Really happy to be here. And thank you to the entire team at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand for putting this together. It was really great working with them. And we've actually done a webinar with them in the past. So really comfortable working with this team and glad to be back. So like Tina said, my name is Phil Manzano and I work at a company called Keela. We build software for nonprofits and software that really helps to make your team a bit more efficient through CRM and a lot of different solutions. But today I'm going to be talking to you about how to use a CRM to recruit and retain volunteers. And this is a topic that I've actually been using my entire career. Working with volunteers is something that I started with in my very first role out of university and continue to use daily throughout every single aspect of my work as well. So working with volunteers is near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure is the same story for all of you as well. So why don't we just go right into it? So the first thing I want to talk to you about is this little quote. So this is something that Muhammad Ali famously said. He said that service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about, right? Service to others and helping other people out of the goodness of your own heart and doing something for an organization. That's what volunteers do every single day. And they are an essential part of every aspect of the nonprofit work. Just as much as donors are. Volunteers are the ones that keep your programs going, especially for the ones that don't have as much capacity, like the smaller shops that are doing just as important work as any of the other organizations. So volunteers are a huge part of what you do and what makes you successful. So it's really important to know how to recruit the best volunteers and to keep them interested in your work and engaged in your work for years to come. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that you want to form a relationship that goes on for years, that is something that is lasting, because then you're able to turn volunteers into advocates, advocates into donors, donors into people who, you know, leave legacy gifts. That's really the dream and the trajectory that you really want for the people that are involved in your organizations as volunteers. So, like I said at the beginning, I have been working with volunteers for quite a while. So that's me on the far right when I was fresh out of university, very, very young. But I actually worked for an organization called Volunteer NBC. And this was in Ontario, in Canada. And basically, Volunteer NBC focused on matching people who wanted to volunteer with organizations and nonprofits that had volunteer opportunities. So we kind of joked internally saying that we were kind of a dating service for people who wanted to volunteer. And I was specifically brought in as the role of youth program coordinator. So I'm not sure if you have similar programs in Australia or New Zealand, but something that was happening in Ontario, in the province that I was a part of, was that in high school, it was actually compulsory for students to complete 40 hours of community service in order to graduate. So if they didn't do that, then they did not graduate, they did not get their diploma, they were not able to go to university or post-secondary studies. So what this created was a need. There was a need because there was a bunch of students who suddenly wanted and needed to volunteer, but didn't know where to look. So that was kind of my role. I was trying to match students with different opportunities for them to volunteer with so that they can hit that 40 hours of community service and then graduate. But there was an inherent problem with this. Because I was focused on matching volunteers with possible opportunities, and there was such a high volume of it, sometimes organizations were not getting the best volunteers, right? They were getting people who definitely needed to volunteer and were there because of that need, but it wasn't necessarily somebody that was an advocate for the cause, that was super interested in the cause and wanting to do something great for that. It's because they wanted to check a box off, and that was it, right? So what I want to talk to you about today are some methods and things that we can actually do as volunteer managers, as people who work in nonprofits, to actually mitigate the chances of you running into this situation where you have volunteers that are mismatched for your organization. And to do that, obviously, we talk about volunteers being a vital part of your work and how you're managing them. But we'll dive into 3 different areas. The first one, we're going to talk about the best practices for volunteer recruitment, what you should look out for, what you should be doing as a volunteer recruiter. Second, we will dive into some of the best practices for retaining volunteers. So now you have them, now they're a part of your organization. What do you do to keep them? We'll talk about that as well. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can use a CRM to get and keep the best volunteers. So once we learn the best practices for volunteer recruitment and retaining those volunteers, we'll learn about how you can use a CRM to actually operationalize those skills and make it a bit more efficient for your team to use. So we'll get really practical and we'll dive deeper into those specific examples as well. So so let's get right into it. So let's start with recruiting volunteers. Recruiting volunteers is often the very first step of trying to build that relationship with somebody that's going to be a part of your organization for times to come. And I'll go back to the example of my role as a youth coordinator for Volunteer in BC. This is what would happen. This is the town that I was a part of, hypothetically, of course. And we would basically run into this kind of situation. As an organization, they would yell and say, "We need volunteers. We need somebody to do something for us." And then people at the high school would be like, "We need volunteer hours to graduate." Those 2 people would look at one another and then they would fall in love, right? They would volunteer. The volunteer opportunity was met by the volunteer and they would do things. But again, we fell into the problems that volunteer engagements ended up being meaningless to the volunteer, right? And that poses quite a few problems. First of all, volunteers can get disengaged with their work when there's no genuine interest, when there's no no initial attraction to the cause and the root issue that the nonprofit is trying to solve. People are just there trying to pass time, to check off that box and do things so that they can get the benefit. And that's not what you want for a volunteer. You have people who are clock watching while on their shift, right? If I'm not sure if you've had this experience, but many of us who have managed volunteers have. When you have a volunteer that is just there waiting for their time to be done, not really doing anything meaningful with their time and not really providing anything of value, right? They're just a body, basically taking up space and doing things to the bare minimum of what you need. And that's not what you want at all. And third, you have lost time and effort for both the volunteer and the organization, right? Anytime that you spend training that volunteer or giving them an orientation or actually having them in the volunteer role itself, if it's not a meaningful fit, that might just be a very transactional relationship, and they might be in and out after that one thing. And depending on what you're doing as an organization, depending on what your goal is with that volunteer role, that might be fine. That might be something that you're okay with. But in broad strokes and in the terms that we want to look at, we're looking at relationship building. We're looking at volunteers who are going to stay with you for the long haul. And this is the kind of problem that shows up when you focus solely on just meeting the need for volunteering, right? So what's the solution? The solution is that you have to start evaluating volunteer opportunities and the applicants based on much more than just their availability, right? So availability is the bare minimum when it comes to your volunteer role. You're allowed to be picky with volunteers. And I actually want to empower you, whoever is recruiting volunteers in your organization, be picky with your volunteers. It's okay to do that because these are important roles that you're trying to fill, and you want to make sure that you have the right fit, right? Fit is absolutely everything when it comes to volunteering. And I'm speaking about this as somebody that managed volunteers, and that was a main proponent of the program that I built. It was all about finding meaningful volunteer opportunities, diving deeper into what the volunteer or the applicant was interested in. What do they care about? What kind of causes do they support? When I know these things, I can start to build a bit of a profile and understand what would actually make them excited as a volunteer, right? I can match them with proper programs so that they're not just doing things and killing time, but they're actually doing something that makes their heart feel full, right? That is exactly the type of engagement that you want for a volunteer. So how do we do this? So I basically think of three different ways that we can solve that problem. So the first one is looking at your volunteer posting kind of like a job posting. See, volunteer jobs are important. So I really want you to recruit like you're hiring for a staff position. And I'm sure this is something that you've heard in the past and something that is pretty familiar to you. But there are some ways that you can really put a scope around this so that you find the right person. Just note that your volunteer role has required skills. It's not just anybody who can fill that role. It's not anybody that just puts their hand up. If there are skills that volunteers should have in order to take that role. So make those clear and communicate them. Second, some roles require experience. Even if it's a volunteer role, even if it's something that you've been struggling to fill for so long, if there is a skill set that you need and there has to be some experience using that skill set, that's okay to put in your job description or your volunteer description because that ensures that you have somebody that is coming with skill, that is coming with an understanding of what you need to be successful in this role. And that's something that you need to start evaluating your volunteers on. And the third is there should be a genuine desire on the part of the applicant, right? And this goes back to the whole apathy point that we were talking about earlier when somebody is just doing something to check off a box. Having a genuine desire on the part of the applicant also speaks to their desire to be a part of your organization. When you talk to your applicants, ask them what drew them not only to the role, but to your organization as a whole, right? Every organization, every nonprofit has a mission that drives them forward. That is basically their reason for doing things. Ask how they relate to that reason. Talk about that and make sure that there's a strong linkage between their values and the values that you have as an organization. When you have that at the base minimum, then you know that you have somebody that actually cares more deeply than just trying to accomplish getting their hours or whatever the case may be. You have somebody in this case that actually cares about the outcomes of the organization and contributing positively to that. So treat your volunteer postings like job postings. You can be very, very specific about what you want. You can ask for required skills, and you can be sure that they know what your organization does, right? These are things that you would vet your employees on. We want you to vet your volunteers this way as well. So another great thing to do is to make sure that the relationship is mutually beneficial. So the worst thing that you can do is to make a volunteer opportunity completely one-sided, right? That is just the makings of a breakup, right? That's what makes really bad relationships from the very beginning. So the first thing that you can do is to make sure that the opportunities benefit both parties. So that means you get a service, obviously the volunteer role being fulfilled, but you also pass something meaningful to the volunteer. And I want to underline meaningful here again. You find out what the volunteer cares about and put them in positions to succeed surrounded by that, that aspect that they found meaningful, right? Dive deeper into them as a person and figure out what will actually make them succeed and make them happy and be meaningful as an experience for them. And start having those conversations so that you can bake that right into the opportunity itself. The second thing you want to do is to make sure that the benefits are clear and obvious to both sides. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to have outcomes for the role, outlining what each side will receive, and put that right into the volunteer posting, right? when you sign up for a webinar or for a course at your university, there are learning outcomes and goals and maybe milestones and achievements right there, telling you exactly what you're going to be getting out of that lesson. And there's no confusion about what you're going to be getting yourself into, right? That is something that you should bake into your volunteer posting. Let them know exactly what they're going to get from it. Let them know how they're going to benefit as a person, as a volunteer, as a professional. Let them know exactly everything that you're offering to them through this opportunity. Because undoubtedly, you're offering so much more than just an opportunity to be a part of the organization. Think about what this role is. Think about the stakeholders that are involved in that role, and really try to sell those positive aspects, because I guarantee that there are so many positives that you can pull out of it. So really think about those and really push forward with them. And the last one is part of the benefit should be skill building. Whether it is a new skill that volunteers will get to engage in daily, or if it's a skill of learning more about the community or about the work that you're doing, have learning really built into what you're doing and what you're offering as a volunteer opportunity. When you do that, you really show the benefit to the volunteer, and it will start to entice them. But more than that, you're starting to find the people who are looking for those skills. You're starting to really weed out the people who aren't looking for those skills, and it gets more and more catered and targeted towards an individual that will actually stay on board with you moving forward. It's all about trying to find the right talent and keep them so that you can thrive as an organization throughout everything that you do in the future. The last point when it comes to recruiting volunteers is relationship building. So your focus should be on building lasting relationships. Lasting relationships with your donor. It should not be transactional. Your goal as a volunteer recruiter at this point is to find people who are going to stay long term, right? That's initially, or that's generally what you want to do for your organization. So one of the things that you can do is get to know your donors with full profiles. And we kind of touched on this earlier in some of the other sections, but one of the best things that you can do is have a full conversation with your donor and note everything about them. What do they like? What don't they like? What kind of causes have they supported in the past? Where do they live in relation to where your work takes place, right? All of these things help give you a better picture of what this donor can do for you and what will actually be meaningful for them. That's probably one of the hardest things to try and nail down. What is going to be meaningful for each individual donor, and it changes from person to person, which is why it's important to build these full profiles that have all this rich information about their interests, about everything that makes them tick, that makes them really move forward. And when you have those things done, you're starting to build a relationship with a person, not just a volunteer, right? And that's a really important thing to note. Second, you want to find out what they're passionate about and incorporate that into their work. Like I said, within your full donor profile, or sorry, not donors, sorry, that should be volunteers, actually. I'm just catching myself now. I do talk about donors quite a bit, but when you build full profiles of volunteers, part of that can be finding out what they actually care about. What kind of things have they donated to? What kind of things have they volunteered for in the past? What kind of things have happened in their life that they really want to support, right? These kinds of deep questions can only be had when you have a real relationship with somebody. It's hard to ask those kinds of things on an application form or things like that. It's something that you develop person to person. And when you find out what they're passionate about and what they're excited about, you can find roles and find ways to incorporate that into their actual volunteering. And when you do that and show them that it's going to be part of their volunteering, that will really excite them and entice them to become a part of your organization as a volunteer. That can really recruit amazing people. Even people who don't necessarily have the skills at the onset. When they're enthusiastic and excited about the cause and excited about their work, they're able to excel so much. And that's something that I've seen happen personally. right? We've placed volunteers into roles that they might not necessarily have been ready for, but they were so excited and so keen to learn. They were so excited to be a part of what the organization was doing that they were absolutely amazing in that role, right? So they learned those skills, and their enthusiasm and their excitement actually carried them. And they were able to do such great things and become such a great advocate for the organization. And that's exactly what we want um, as volunteer managers and people who are recruiting volunteers. And finally, another way that you can really focus on relationship building is to track their milestones and acknowledge them, right? So you can, if you know when somebody has volunteered, you can take note of it somewhere, and then actually talk to them about them, talk to them about their goals for volunteering, and when they hit those goals, actually acknowledge them and celebrate them for what they've done, right? These kinds of things are things that you can bake into your recruitment process so that you can actually let people know that they are going to be celebrated for what they're doing. And another way that you can really showcase this is by getting some testimonials from other volunteers. Have other volunteers and other people who have done work with your organization and have had a positive experience. Get them to talk about the amazing relationships that they've built with the organization. Get them to talk about how your organization is recognizing the work that they're doing, and let your new applicants know about these testimonials. Let them see firsthand what kind of impact and what kind of celebration and milestones they can expect to hit themselves. Right. So those are three of the basic areas where you can really focus your efforts when it comes to when it comes to recruiting volunteers and making sure that it's not just based on availability. So it's creating volunteer postings that are looking like job posting. It's making sure that a relationship is mutually beneficial, and it is focusing on relationship building rather than transactional relationships and one-offs. Okay. And there's a lot there, and there's a lot more that we can unpack, and we'll dive deeper into the CRM portion about how you can accomplish those things. And hopefully there will be some time at the end where we can actually answer any questions that you might have regarding that first section, because I know that we kind of blew through that pretty quickly. So let's dive into the second section, which is to retain volunteers. Now you've done your job, you've recruited a really great volunteer, and they're doing great work for you. What do you do to keep them? So here's another scenario, going back to this fictitious neighborhood, that often happens with NPOs who aren't giving too much attention to volunteers. So the NPO is saying, we have great volunteers. They recognize just how great the volunteers are because they're doing an amazing job. They're doing amazing work for the organization. And over here, we have a volunteer saying, this program is getting a bit stale. Is there anything else that I can do? And as a nonprofit, you say these really dangerous words. We've always done things this way. And if your organization has said this in the past, I really, really advise you to change that type of thinking, right? You always want to innovate. But let's say that this nonprofit says we've always done things that way. Well, that might be met by a volunteer saying, you know what, I'm going to look for another opportunity, something else that's more exciting to me. And then the nonprofit shifts. Wait, we appreciate you, stay with us, right? So something happened, and it's a bit too late to keep that volunteer because in their mind, they're already gone. So the problem is that often NPOs are being reactive when it comes to retaining talented volunteers. And a few things happen when you have this kind of mindset. So first, you lose out on opportunities to actually acknowledge volunteers. Like the scenario that I just kind of showed to you, you don't know what's going on in a volunteer's head. You don't know what kind of decisions they've already made based off of their experience with your organization. The best way that you can do that is to get ahead of that and to actually talk to that volunteer and keep that relationship going, right? But if you don't have that opportunity, if you don't have that conversation constantly going, you're losing out on opportunities to acknowledge them because there are so many things and so many milestones that you could acknowledge them for. A second thing that happens, there are some nonprofits that don't listen to their volunteers enough. Often your volunteers will be telling you exactly what they like about programs and what they don't like about programs. Now, both of those bits of information are extremely valuable when it comes to the success of your programming and the outcomes for your organization as a whole. Listen to what they're saying, take it in, and take it seriously. All of those things really matter when it comes to success of your programs and making volunteers feel like they are appreciated. So take some time, listen to their feedback, and listen to it intently. Third thing, there's not enough focus or effort on keeping volunteers happy. A lot of this can result as a result of capacity issues. Volunteer managers could often be managing multiple programs, or more often than not, they are managing more than one program and trying to keep things afloat. That's something that I ran into quite a bit. A lot of the nonprofits that I was working with, these volunteer managers were doing volunteer management off the side of their desk, and they're trying to recruit people while doing their own job and trying to keep people happy and communicate and just make sure that the outcomes were hit, right? So there are a lot of things that are happening to prevent them from trying to keep volunteers happy, because they're just trying to keep the programs alive. But if you can shift that kind of mentality and really put a focus on keeping volunteers happy, then you are able to retain more volunteers. And we'll dive into some deeper strategies in order to do that. And the fourth thing is that it's easier to keep volunteers than it is to recruit new ones. This is something that is a really interesting point to me, because recruiting volunteers takes so much time, right? You have to put the posting together. You have to put the posting out there, advertise that posting, put it on social media. You have to look at applicants, vet applicants, make sure that you have the right people that are coming in. All of these things take time, and time does equal money in this case, because it's a paid staff person that's doing all of this, right? So in order to find that right fit, get them to do a volunteer job and have them leave, that is so expensive, right? It is expensive because you're wasting time and money every time you have turnover in that department. What you want to do is, once you find a really great fit, keep them happy, keep them in the door, because you've already done that investment at the beginning, and you're able to keep them and really hone their skills and really turn them into an advocate for your cause. And that's what you want to do to get the most value out of your volunteers, right? To make sure that they are providing the most value for your team. So I've kind of danced around it, but the solution to that problem is to be proactive, by treating and managing your volunteers as though they are part of the organization. Because, and I think this is worded wrong. I don't think it should be as though they're part of the organization. They are part of your organization, right? They're a very vital part of your organization. And you don't want to give volunteers any opportunity to think that you don't think that of them, right? You want them to know that they are important to your work, and they want to feel appreciated at every opportunity. So be proactive and try your best to show them that they are meaningful and valued and important to your work. So here are some of the ways that you can be proactive: through training and investment. So that's one of the first ways. So you can't just throw volunteers into the fire. You have to give them support, right? When volunteers are trained, they perform better. I think it's a pretty simple idea, and it's pretty straightforward, but it's often something that smaller teams miss. You have to give your volunteers training and not just expect them to go into a role knowing what to do just because they have the requisite skills, right? You want them to feel like they're ready and feel like they know exactly what they have to do day to day. If this means sitting down with them for an orientation or going through a day of shadowing, so be it. Let them know that they are a part of your organization and that it's worth you giving up your time to actually show them how to do the job properly. Not only will that give them more responsibility, but it'll make them feel valued, and it'll make them feel like they're part of a team and part of something bigger. Second, it's easy to get confused and frustrated when there's no training. I'm sure that there have been scenarios in your organization or in your past work life where you might have been thrown into a job and not known exactly what to do. And even if you are, you have the skills to do the things that are required of this role or of that job, it's still super easy to get confused. You don't know the shared language, for example. You don't know where things and files are put. when you don't have this knowledge and this institutional knowledge that everybody else around you seems to have, you can get really dejected, especially as a volunteer, right? You feel like you're not doing what they brought you in for, but in actuality, you're just not being trained properly. So the failure isn't in the volunteer, it might be in the volunteer management. And that's something that we never want the volunteer to feel. We don't want them to feel like they're failing the organization or not doing a great job. And one way to really get in front of that is to invest in their training early on. Make sure that they feel comfortable, that they have all the opportunities to ask questions and do things at a pace that they are really comfortable with, that still aligns with the goals of the organization, right? Finding that balance is really important. So the second thing is to have concrete goals, right? Measuring success is an important part of retaining volunteers. And one of the things that you can do is to start with goals. So the first thing is to get SMART. We all know all about SMART goals. So it's that acronym: specific goals, measurable goals, attainable goals, realistic goals, time-based goals. Have a goal that is very, very smart for your volunteers. It's not just that they show up and punch the clock and do their thing. Actually give them goals that they are trying to reach by a certain date and time, so that you can measure against those goals and actually see how your volunteers are doing. You'll know that this is a really great metric for you as a volunteer manager, but it's also great for the volunteer because they are actually working towards something. It gives their role even more purpose beyond what is already meaningful to them. Another great thing about having goals for them is that you add a sense of responsibility. See, when volunteers are responsible for meeting a goal, they take it more seriously. Imagine yourself in this scenario when you take on a new role and immediately there is a goal for you to reach. You don't take that lightly. You try to hit that goal, and you know that you're going to be measured against that goal. It doesn't have to be done in a really prescriptive or intense competitive way, but it is something that that somebody can shoot for. It's a North Star for an organization and for a volunteer to actually shoot for, and that's a really great thing to have, as opposed to nonchalantly showing up and doing what we need you to do, right? That's not the type of relationship that you want to have. And finally, there is more accountability. When clear goals are set at the beginning of the relationship, volunteers are able to hold themselves accountable, right? So in addition to feeling a bit more responsible, there's a bit of an internal fire that's lit for the volunteer. They know that they have to hit a goal, and they want to hit that goal, and they want to surpass that goal. So they have a bit of accountability, and they're holding themselves more accountable to hitting that goal because of their own personal goals and what they want to do with the role, with the organization and personally as well. So having concrete goals at the beginning will really help to retain those volunteers that you spent so much time recruiting. The second point is to get organized, right? A major part of a volunteer's experience is how organized you are as a manager. So this is looking directly into the face of those who are dealing with the management of volunteers, the day-to-day of volunteers. A lot of the time, we are not as organized as we can be when it comes to dealing with our volunteers. And it's tough to find that time. It's tough when we don't have the tools. It's tough when we don't have the support. But it is something that we need to get better at so that our volunteers stay long term, right? You are the conduit for the nonprofit. The volunteers get their information from you. So every interaction that they have with you, how organized you are, how you deal with delegation of tasks and things of that nature, that becomes a reflection of the organization in the volunteers' eyes, because they are looking at you kind of like you're the organization. All the information that they need and all the relationships that are housed within the organization come from you, right? So that is a really important thing to take note of as a volunteer manager. So one of the things that you can do is create tasks. It's pretty simple, right? It's if there are things that you'd like the volunteer to complete, communicate it to them in a very, very clear way. And one of the ways that you can do that is through tasks. Something that is a SMART goal that they can achieve and tick off of their to-do list. But make sure that it's communicated to them in a really organized and neat way. And another part is to get on the same page. So establish a communication schedule and a method that works for both sides. And I can't stress this enough, stick to that, right? it is really frustrating as somebody that is managing a relationship, when you establish, a way of communicating and nobody actually sticks to that. If you tell your volunteer that you are going to be available for them to ask questions from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. every Monday, and then they come at 8 a.m. Full of questions and you're not available for them, that becomes really frustrating. That becomes a source of frustration and a source for them souring their relationship with your organization and maybe forcing them to leave, right? What you want to do is set a time that works for both of you. Find a time in your schedules, find a method that works for you, whether it's phone or email or WhatsApp or whatever kind of app that will work for you. And make sure that you stick to those guidelines and those ways of communicating that you both agree to. When you have that mutually respectful line of communication, you're able to do a lot more and communicate a lot more effectively. And at the end of the day, it reflects a lot better on the organization and the team that you're trying to get this volunteer to stay a part of for years to come, right? So get organized, and that will be a really great way for you to retain quality volunteers moving forward. And another great way to retain volunteers is to recognize their contribution. Like I said on the slide here, it seems like a no-brainer, but you have to thank your volunteers. And there are so many avenues for you to do that, and there's so many things that you can recognize. The first thing is to thank them for their support. Obviously, they are supporting your organization in the broad sense, but they're also very much supporting a minute part of your mission, the program that they're a part of is something that you can really be specific about in your thanking of them. Thank them for doing exactly what they do every single day. Let them know that you know what they do, and you're so appreciative for it, right? Thank them for that. Another thing is thank them for not only their support, but for their work over and over again. I'm a huge proponent of the fact that there is no such thing as overthanking when it comes to volunteers or for your donors, right? You can thank them again if they've done something amazing, if they've turned in an amazing piece of work for your organization, if they accomplished something great. Thank them for that. Let them know that you really do appreciate it, and link back to the things that make that work important. And that kind of links back to this third point, which is show them the impact of their work. One of the things that kind of alienates volunteers is the fact that they feel like they are siloed. They don't know what impact they're having on the large organization or the outcomes that the organization is working towards. So one of the things that you can do is pull back that curtain. Show them exactly what their contribution means as it rolls up to the larger organization, right? If having them man a ticket booth at an event means that you raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for your cause, that's something that they meaningfully contributed towards. And you want to communicate that value to them because it lets them know that they are doing something that matters. They're doing something that matters to the organization that they care about. And that will entice them and encourage them to keep doing it, to keep being a part of your organization, and understand that they are doing something that actually will contribute to something great in the future. And the fourth thing is share accolades from other colleagues. One of the greatest things that happen within nonprofits, and this is why I love working in nonprofits, is that there is such a genuine love for the volunteers that come through. And that love for the volunteers, it comes through in a lot of different ways, but one of the main ways is through feedback from other colleagues. Other colleagues will mention, great work based off of things that have happened at the volunteer level. As a volunteer manager, communicate all of those accolades down. Let people know that, hey, our CEO actually loved what you did. Our executive director loved that you were at that table and you were so energetic, and they wanted you to know that they love that you're keeping up the great work and you're really driving and doing meaningful work. Like that kind of message, letting people know that it's not just me as a volunteer manager that recognizes your work, but my entire organization recognizes your work. That adds so much value to a volunteer, right? So communicate accolades down and let them know that they are valued and that other people are noticing their work, right? That really helps to to get people involved. Right. So those are three of the ways that you can really be proactive in keeping your volunteers involved. So by focusing on training and investment, by having concrete goals, by getting organized, and by recognizing people's contribution. Right. Those are really great ways to really get in front of them. So the question remains, and the main reason why a lot of people signed on for this webinar is, how do we use a CRM to recruit and retain volunteers? And one of the things that I've kind of talked about throughout this presentation is that there are a lot of things that are asked of a volunteer manager, and there can be capacity issues that stand in the way of you doing that. Well, what I'm here to talk about is how a CRM can help to alleviate some of that pressure, can help to make you work more efficiently so that managing volunteers and recruiting volunteers actually becomes something that is manageable. And we'll dive into some of the very specific ways of doing that. So as a recap for recruiting volunteers, we learned that you should treat volunteer roles like job roles. You should create a mutually beneficial relationship, and you should focus on relationship building. So for the purposes of this example, let's talk about the first one. You should treat volunteer roles like their job roles. In order to do this, you should start tracking interests by looking at email interests. So when you send your email, your newsletters, or any targeted appeals to your volunteers or to anybody in your network, you can get a lot of insights based off of the ones that are being clicked and opened. So if somebody opens up an email that has to do with a dog shelter, you might know that this particular person would be really interested in this position that we have open at the dog shelter, right? It's a pretty easy connection to make, but if you don't know that person opened that email, that connection is lost to you, right? So start tracking interest by looking at emails and what people open. So you can keep track of all your communications. When you are talking to volunteers via email or via phone or Post-its or spreadsheets or wherever you're having these conversations, have a central place to put all of those conversations and really understand what a volunteer or potential volunteer could look like for your organization. So having all those conversations in one place helps to do that. And again, having a place for your notes is also really important. One place for you to note those interests, to note, that these individuals really care about this program. Things like that, really having a central place for all of those kinds of notes when it comes to recruiting is really, really important. So having a central place for that is really great, and the CRM could be that. And a really tactical thing that you can do is to create groups and tags based on the stage of the process that your volunteer applicant finds themselves in. So if it's somebody that has gone through an interview, they can be in a certain tag and you can send certain messaging to them. If it is somebody that has expressed interest in this type of volunteer program that has to do with dogs, you can send them a certain type of messaging. So grouping your applicants based off of the stage they are in your process really helps for you to, one, get organized, but two, actually mold your messaging in a way that is meaningful to the person who's receiving it. So what does this actually look like? So when you're recruiting volunteers, this is something that is very similar and that you'd find in many CRMs. This is Kila's CRM when it comes to sending out emails. And one of the great things here is that you can see open rates. And this is something that you'd be able to see when your email system speaks to your CRM, and whatever your system is, a lot of them do have this type of functionality. But you can see open rates, right? You can see how many people are opening this message about the dog shelter volunteer opportunity, right? You know exactly who will have interest in that. Click rates. Click rates basically show you who's actually clicking on something after they've opened up the email. If there was a link to the application, or if there was a link to your website to learn more about the volunteer posting, you have a list of people who actually clicked in your email and went through with your call to action. So you know exactly the individuals who actually expressed an interest and wanted to learn more. So that could even be a very catered type of message. And then you have the opportunity to segment those results. Now, what I mean by segmenting those results is by separating people based off of the action that they took. So something that you can do in Keela and a lot of the other CRMs that are out there is to create a tag. So here, I'm able directly from this screen to create a tag based off of the people who opened this email, so opened recipients. And I can click on the tag button to create a segment. So those 3 people, I know that they opened this email about this volunteer position, and I can talk to them specifically about the position in greater detail because I know they already have a bit of interest in it, right? So that's some of the things that you can do with a CRM, and that helps you narrow your search just the people that are really, really interested, and not just trying to tick off a box and complete their 40 hours of community service, for example. Right. Another thing that you can do is that you can create tags or groups based on different volunteer programs. And I kind of talked about this in the past, but based off of the people who are, engaged with you through your CRM, you could create a tag or a segment called, for example, art project volunteers. So anybody that's volunteering for the art project will automatically go into that tag, and you can send specifically those people updates about the art project. Impact reports. This is what we've done in the art project in 2018, and this is what you've helped to accomplish. Or here are the upcoming volunteer opportunities just for the art project, itself. Now you know that this is a very catered list, and these are people that are super hyper interested in the art program. And you have a list of people that are jumping to be a part of your organization, specifically in that area, right? So you have so really make use of the tags and the groups in order to send out really meaningful, important messages to specific people. So when it comes to retaining volunteers, as a recap, we learned that you should train your volunteers. Obviously, that's a really big part of it. You should set concrete goals for your volunteers, which is a really important part to make sure that they have meaningful engagement. And you should always be organized when dealing with your volunteers, because how you deal with them is a reflection of how they look at the organization as a whole. And fourth, you should recognize your volunteer contributions. So for the purposes of this, when we dive into the CRM, let's look at the last 3. I'll be the first to admit that training your volunteers is a really difficult thing to do with just the CRM, because there are a lot of things that you have to do in person, and it gets a lot more hands-on than the capabilities of most CRMs. But if you have a way of doing it, and there are ways to track goals and milestones on CRMs, I am interested in talking about that so that we can share notes on how to do that. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's talk about the 3 goals at the bottom: how you can set goals, how you can keep organized, and how you can recognize volunteers for their contributions. So first one is setting goals. So within your CRM, this is Keela's, but any CRM will do. Look up a volunteer. So let's look up myself. I put it in Philip Manzano. And what I've pinned to the top of my profile is the goal that we set: help 20 students with essay assignments. Now, wherever I go into my CRM, it's actually right there on the side. It's always there, top of mind for me as a volunteer manager. I know exactly what we're trying to do. So this is just a GIF, so it's going to replay, but that's a really important piece when it comes to setting goals. Setting goals is great, but it's meaningless if that information is lost, if you don't constantly know what you're working towards, right? So one of the best ways to keep it top of mind is to pin that goal to your volunteer's profile, right? So within Keela, within many CRMs, within basically any CRM that you can think of, you can pin those goals to the top and really have that top of mind. One way that you can stay organized is by actually logging activity based off of your volunteers directly into the CRM. This CRM has a volunteering component where you can actually say who's been volunteering when and talk about exactly what they're doing so that you have detailed notes and know exactly how many hours they've contributed towards. But what you can do in your CRM is use your notes functionality. Notes are often these areas that are kind of custom for your CRM, where you're able to put in your own field and talk about something that is important to your organization that might not have been designated as a section by your CRM, right? By your actual system. Use your notes and have those notes pinned to the top as well. Right? If you want to track how many volunteer hours they've done on a specific day, you can do that in a note. And every time you go into that profile of that individual, you can look at the notes section and see day by day exactly how many things they've accomplished and how many hours they've done, whatever metric it is that is important to you and that you've agreed upon as a SMART goal together, right? So that's another way that you can stay organized. And the great thing about that is that it's all in one place, right? Well, one of the things that we try to really encourage organizations is to get away from all of the spreadsheets and all of the notebooks and all of the post-its and start living inside of CRM, because that becomes the brain of your organization, right? That becomes the place where you have all of the knowledge and institutional knowledge of what is going on day to day with your nonprofit, right? So you want to make sure that all of those interactions and all of those notes are logged right there. So that's a really great way for you to stay organized. And the last one is to recognize volunteers. Another thing that you can do with any CRM that you can think of is to set follow-ups. So here I'm going back into my profile as a volunteer, and I noticed at the top here that my join date was September 30th, 2017. So that was about a year ago, right? And if I want to recognize this volunteer for being a volunteer for 1 year, that's a huge milestone. And we talked about recognizing volunteers for their milestones. That's a huge thing that you want to do. But after a year, you might forget that. And that might be on a post-it somewhere, and you might lose that post-it, right? Why not use your CRM to actually remind you, to send an email or to call that volunteer to thank them for what they've done for your organization, right? You can set really, really specific follow-ups and reminders for yourself, so that'll be reminded to you a day before, a week before, whenever you want, right? Have those notifications pop up right away so that you stay on top of these relationships and don't let those opportunities to acknowledge your volunteers pass you by, right? That's the thing that we want to stay away from. So a lot of you might be thinking, that's great. You know, those are really general, high-level examples of using CRM, but what does that look like in a real context? Well, Rice Movement, which is an organization that's based in Australia, is one of Teal's clients, and they came to us with the goal of growing. They want to grow their operations to other parts of Australia and expand into New Zealand. But with that expansion and with that growth meant decentralized programs, right? So that includes their volunteering. They are running out of a central office, but their programs are happening all over the country. And this can pose a problem when it comes to a lot of the things that we talked about when it comes to, actually developing a relationship with your volunteers. Because you're not there in person, it's hard to build those meaningful relationships. But what you're able to do, and what Rice Movement is able to do, is they're able to move those relationships online. They're able to move those relationships and put them all into one CRM and one place. They're able to speak to their volunteers and know exactly what's going on with their volunteers, because from wherever their organization is, people are inputting data and everybody is able to access it, right? So it's this one brain for the organization, for people to truly understand the value of their volunteers and their work, and the true history and picture of what that volunteer is doing from wherever you are. So you're able to work remotely, and that's something that Rice Movement is able to do more effectively. They're able to move away from spreadsheets and other programs and put all of those relationships into a CRM, including their volunteer relationships, including their volunteer management, and they're able to grow that volunteer base and help their organization grow as a main goal for them, and as something that they can achieve moving forward, right? So to wrap up, I know we're running short on time, and I do want to leave some time for a few questions at least. CRMs help volunteers and help volunteer managers. By being creative with your CRM, you'll be able to manage volunteers and get more out of that relationship. You'll be able to recruit the best volunteers by staying organized and tracking all of the communications of the applicants that come through. You're able to retain the best volunteers by reminding yourself of opportunities to acknowledge them, by really getting in front of those situations where they might lose interest, by tracking exactly what they're doing and giving them meaningful goals to accomplish. And third, and this is really the blanket that is great about the CRM when it comes to your volunteer management, it helps you work more efficiently. like I said, there's a lot of things that are on the plate of every single individual that works at a nonprofit. But more importantly, for those in a volunteer management role, you have so many things going on and so many competing priorities that you need tools that will make things easier, that will save you time and money, and become a more reliable solution for you than writing down notes in random places, right? So having all of that history in one place will help you recruit, will help you retain, and help you work much, much more efficiently. So with that, I just want to say thank you very, very much for listening and going through this webinar with me. I do look forward to some questions and diving deeper into any of the areas that you are interested in. And if there's something that you want to know more about that I didn't get a chance to cover, please let's talk. Feel free to send me an email at philip.manzano@networksforchange.org, and I'm happy to dive into anything to do with CRMs or volunteer management and recruitment and retaining volunteers as well. So for that, I just want to say thank you very, very much, and I'll pass it back over to Tina.
Thanks, Phil. We do have a couple of questions. There's one from Ricky asking, goal tracking is great, and how do you manage this at scale with all the volunteers you have?
Sure. Yeah. So that is a great question. So what I would do in that case, um, when it comes to managing goals at scale, I like to really look, or at least I like to zoom out. I try to look at the program itself and the goals that we're trying to track for the programs, and the metrics that we're tracking for the program, and how each of those individual goals kind of roll up to that main goal. But one of the ways that I can really manage it is to start grouping your volunteers into different segments. So we talked about creating segments and tags within your CRM. When you have individuals that have specific goals, there might be goals that are very, very similar. And what you can do is start creating goals for an entire segment, goals for an entire group, and things that you are able to work towards that are a bit more manageable. So you're basically breaking down or lumping together volunteers in bigger chunks so that it's more manageable for you as a volunteer manager to see how these individuals are actually contributing to a larger goal. So when you break them down into larger groups with larger goals and then dive deeper in that way, then you can actually start treating individuals that are in each of those segments kind of like teams, and you kind of approach it that way. So when you have tons of volunteers, you can break it down into different groups and different teams, and you can target your messaging and your coaching towards each of those groups and those goals a bit more effectively. So that's kind of one of the ways that we've attacked trying to deal with volunteers and goal tracking at scale. Hopefully that's one thing that you could try, but always happy to dive into other things that we've tried as well. So feel free to connect with me afterwards, and we can talk about other strategies.
Okay, we've got one from Tune. What are some best practices to recruiting student volunteers at college or uni?
Sure, yeah. So one of the great things about student volunteers, like I said at the beginning, is that there are always going to be tons of them. But one of the things is that they don't know where to look for volunteer opportunities. As a best practice, get in contact with the university, get in contact with the school. They often have volunteer boards, places where community members and churches and nonprofits can actually post their opportunities and everything that they have available. This is often done through the resource center through the school, or something to do with the admin or student success center, however you want to call it. But get involved with them and have your posting blasted on their postings. Another thing is get involved with the campus. If you can make yourself visible there, that would be really, really great. There are often student days and opportunities for people to table and things like that are often free for nonprofits. It takes a bit of time, but often being visible and making it super easy for students to find you, that's a really great way to get in front of them. So tabling at the school, tabling at a student event, things like that, which organizations and schools are typically very, very open to. So start with those two things in order to get in front of student volunteers. And another thing, if you have a very catered position, if you have a social media position, for example, talk to the department heads who are talking about digital marketing, who are teaching digital marketing, and tell them that you have volunteer roles available, and they might be able to do something very special for you in terms of getting you in front of their students who have that skill set. So those are a few things that you can do.
Okay, Stacey would like to know, what software do you recommend for nonprofits to assist with volunteer management?
Sure. So there are a lot of pieces of software that you can use. In terms of what is available, obviously the ones that I'm an expert in is the one that from the company that I'm a part of. But something that is a bit more unbiased is I would recommend going on directories and learning a bit more about the specific feature sets that you're looking for. Like a directory like Capterra or Software Advice, things like that will help you find exactly what you're looking for. The thing with offering suggestions for volunteer management software is that everybody kind of looks for different feature sets. So it's hard to figure out exactly what your specific organization wants. So what I would say is go to an online directory that has unbiased reviews and be very, very specific about what you need, because what your organization needs might not be valuable to another organization. So it's hard to have a blanket recommendation there. It's a bit of a cop out, I'm sorry, but again, this is another thing that we can talk about a bit more in depth once after the webinar. So feel free to connect with me, and I can give you better recommendations based off of your specific use case.
Okay, Tune has asked, is appreciating volunteers through blogs, social media, or a newsletter a good idea? Or perhaps holding appreciation celebrations or token appreciations that are more effective?
Sure. So it depends on where your volunteers live. Or when I say live, I mean is where do they interact with you? Take some time to figure out, do your volunteers read the blog? Do your volunteers read your newsletters? And if you have a CRM that tracks that, you can get that information very easily, right? But I guess the main point I want to say is meet them where they are, right? If they are on your blog, if they are on newsletters, then absolutely, that is the place that you want to acknowledge them. But if you know that they are not digital, they're not in those places, then do something in person, right? It doesn't even hurt to survey them, ask them exactly, do you read our blog? Are you a part of this, or do you like doing things in person? When you have that answer, formulate your appreciation strategy around that, around where they are. So meet your volunteers where they are and appreciate them in a way that actually will speak to them and that they'll actually hear. So again, it depends, but listen to your volunteers. They'll tell you exactly how they want to be appreciated.
Okay, I think that's all for questions today. Was there anything you wanted to add, Phil?
No, just a big thank you to everybody that was on the webinar and that had questions. I apologize that we didn't have time for more, but again, I've left my information there. If you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer those for you.
Great. Thanks, Phil, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from this presentation and that all your questions have been answered. If you do have anything that comes to mind later or any feedback about the webinar, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we'll answer those questions offline. You can also contact Phil directly via the information on your screen. Don't forget that the recording will be available within 2 business days and a link will be sent to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you all for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.